Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Star Trek: The Lost Era, Deny Thy Father. This is one of the books set in between the original series ending, the last of the movies, and also the beginning of the Next Generation TV show. And this was a series that was in the early 2000s that started running. They were covered a bunch of different characters, a bunch of different timelines, and I started reading this series because of the Literary Treks podcast. I was invited to join in January of this year. I'm now one of the co-hosts on that podcast, and we're currently finishing up. This is the penultimate book in the series that we're going to read, and I'd read two of the other ones previously. I'd read The Art of the Impossible by Keith DeCandido and The Well of Souls by Elsa J. Brick. And to be honest, I did not care for either. I thought Art of the Impossible was okay, but I didn't really particularly like it. And Well of Souls, I did not like at all. I thought it was just not a good book. And so I had felt kind of, all right, I'm going to go through the motions of Deny Thy Father and read it, but I wasn't excited about it because I didn't have the greatest track record with the Lost Era books. But I got the book, and first my thought was, well, it's about the same length as Art of the Impossible, so it's longer than the average Star Trek book, but it's not as long as Well of Souls, so it shouldn't take me too long to read. And then I started reading the book, and I had a blast with this book. This is such an entertaining book. This book focuses on two Rikers. You have Will Riker, obviously, who is in the Academy, and then you have his father, Kyle Riker, who is in kind of a political thriller. And the main crux of the book is this kind of political thriller stuff where Kyle Riker is on the run from the government, and then there's also an element of like telling the story of Will Riker's time at the Academy and all the special tests he has to go through, and his relationships and friendships at the Academy, and his romance, the kind of love triangle that he's in, which is weird, and and his friendships that he forms. And so the book also has, especially towards the end, these kind of classic elements of Star Trek in it. And so the book is an amalgam of storytelling, but it is like the perfect blend for me. I love political thrillers in Star Trek. Some of my favorite Star Trek books are their political thrillers. In fact, as I think through, like Takedown, the Prey trilogy, the Fall series, those are all basically political thrillers, books or series, and I loved them all. And this book has that. That is the majority of this book. But it also still feels like Star Trek. Sometimes you read a political thriller in Star Trek, and it just feels out of place. It feels like it's just a book with Star Trek slapped on it. Or you read a book, and it feels like they're trying too much to do Star Trek stuff, and it doesn't feel like a fun original book. This book is the perfect blend, and it is able to feel like an original book while also feeling really much like Star Trek. And so first with the Kyle Riker storyline, he encounters some familiar faces. He's mostly working with Owen Paris, who is one of my favorite characters in Star Trek. I love reading about Owen Paris. He is such a complicated individual. He is such an interesting character that he basically serves as a father figure for so many in Star Trek, except the one person who he is the father of. He is not a good father figure to his actual son, Tom Paris, and yet he is a great father figure to Kyle Riker and to other characters in the series. And Kyle Riker has just a very strained relationship with his son, and because of the TV show The Next Generation, it was written that they couldn't interact at all in this book. So there are several times where they were so close to interacting, and I was like, ooh, maybe they're gonna interact finally. They're gonna break the nope. They didn't. They never broke the canon. They never interacted in this book. And it was just interesting decision making on the part of the writer, and the way he was able to do it to make me think, oh, we're gonna see that reunion, and then we never did. I thought that, Will Riker's storyline, which is much more of like the Academy storyline, was very interesting. And the first part of the book, we see him go through these tests, which are actually quite funny because it's very like low-tech tests. And you think Starfleet would have the ability to send them to a new planet or something. But no, they just send them to San Francisco to pretend they're on a different planet. And it was really interesting. And then also he has a good dynamic with the other people in his group. And he also falls in love, or at least thinks he falls in love with this girl, kind of, and they have like a will they, won't they in the book, and there's also someone else who's vying for the girl's relationship, which was a little bit weird, the way that the author handled it, but still, it was a very, very sweet, some sweet moments, and it's a much more PG-13 appropriate version of a Will Riker romance than, say, Imzadi, which is very much a hard R romance. Anyway, you also have the kind of classic Star Trek storyline at the end. They're sent to this planet to deal with something with some kind of political unrest on it, and Kyle Riker is advising Owen Paris and his team, and there is just a maneuver at the end of the book where they're trying to get the ship out of harm's way. They're trying to get the Pegasus, which is Will Riker's ship that he's on. He's one of the officers on the ship. And it is just a delightful sequence because it feels so classic Star Trek. If you've watched The Search for Spock, you will feel like this is something straight out of Search for Spock, but also feels like it has that kind of Will Riker ingenuitive types thing to it. Like, I could see, like, Will Riker doesn't come up with the maneuver, but you can see how this maneuver sets him up to come up with ideas in the Next Generation show and in Picard. Like, there's so much in this book that, like, sets him up for the future that I really liked. And so it did have some of those touchstones of classic Trek moments to me. So I really liked this book, and it was a breath of fresh air compared to the others. There have been other Star Trek books I've read this year that were great, that were fantastic books. Even some of the ones that were released this year, like the new Greg Cox book, I thought was really good. But the Lost Era was really kind of just, I was just going through the motions, and so I'm so happy to say that this is a book in the Lost Era you can read, and none of these books, like, require you to have read the others. So you don't need to read all the other Lost Era. They're all standalones, basically. You can read this by itself. It is a really good book by itself. And so I would highly recommend it. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. It was a great book, and I'm so happy that I read it, and I'm so happy that it exists. So if you've read Deny Thy Father, what did you think of it? What did you think about the big maneuver at the end? What did you think about the mystery with who was behind all the stuff with Kyle Riker and the political thriller stuff? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.